Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about game development roles. Now, I could have sworn I had talked about this before, but the closest I got was programming programming roles. But I have talked a lot about what makes a good game director, traits I look for in producers, and challenges that programmers, artists, or designers have to face. So there's a lot of related videos, and I've linked them all in the description. But I'm gonna do this one now. I'm answering Seth the Guy GD, who asks, I was wondering if you have a video explaining the job in game development process and what they do. Artists, programmers, producers, leads, designers, and all that. I was having questions about that. I know that every studio is different, but could you explain it to me? I know it might be silly, their names are self-explanatory, but would mean a lot. In other words, who does motion capture, who does quest items? I get it, and it is different in every studio, and I'll try to mention where those differences come in. So I'm going to describe like what I encountered, and keep in mind I've never worked at really, really huge companies, but I have worked on small and medium-sized teams. So I will talk about that. And let's start with the game director. The game director has also in the past been called project leader. This is basically whoever is the keeper of the vision. Whoever is like, this is my idea for the game we're making. Doesn't mean a lot of people don't contribute, but who's like pushing this thing through? Who's steering the boat? Who writes the design pillars? Who decides what the goals are of all the different features that are in the game? And sometimes even writes the design docs for those features. That's the game director. That's the project leader. Also, towards the end of development, this is the person who will play the game a lot. No one will play the game, with the exception of possibly QA, more than the game director. Because it's their vision, they've got to see all the different parts of the game. They've got to see as much as there is to see. They may not ever be able to see all of it, but they're going to try to see as much as they can to make sure that everything's aligned to that. Let me quickly jump to producer. Producers come in roughly 3 tiers. There's executive producer, which are usually only exist in bigger companies. Otherwise, they're called a lead producer. In a bigger company, you have an executive producer with lots of lead producers under them. In smaller companies, you may just have a lead producer. In which case, what that role does is they keep the master schedule for the game, all the estimates of how long things are going to take in all the different areas, so they can come up with, here's when I think the game will ship, which may not align with when it's supposed to ship. They're the person who interfaces with the publisher. When the publisher calls, they tend to call the executive or lead producer. They also interface with the other parts of the studio, like the owners, the president, the VPs, HR. Now, those people can reach out directly to people on the team too, but when they have general questions about the project, like is it on schedule, or when is the next time we're talking to the publisher, or when does localization start, they go to the EP. The EP or lead also manages other producers, and they may even manage some external development. In really big titles, you may hand art out to external companies, especially cinematics, localization, things like that. Anything that's not done in-house will eventually get coordinated through the EP or the lead. And then under them, sometimes it's called assistant producer, sometimes it's called associate producer. Some places have both of those and they tier them. I can never remember if it's assistant producer is higher than associate or associate's higher than assistant. At Interplay, they were both called ASPRODs, affectionately. What these people do is they answer to their lead, or the executive producer, and they manage strike teams. Strike teams are when you put together a small group of around 5 or 6 of the people on the game team to work on a particular part. Like there may be a combat strike team, there may be a stealth strike team, there may be a cinematic strike team, there may be a lighting strike team, and it's usually a programmer, one or more programmers, artists, and designers managed by an assistant producer. They keep the schedules for those strike teams and everybody who's on them, and they pass those numbers up to the lead or the EP to put into the master schedule. They also handle some external developers as well. This leads us to programmer. And actually, really fast, let me talk about programmer, artists, and designers, what they all share in common. They all have a very similar hierarchy. Usually you have a director for that area, a programming director, a design director, or a art director. These are the people who manage everyone under the leads. And the leads are leads in all the different areas. Now, on smaller projects, you may only have a lead programmer or a lead designer or a lead artist. And the sub areas are managed by seniors. But on really big projects, and this is what we did, say, on the Outer Worlds, you have a director, and the director talks to leads in all the different areas. And then adjacent to the lead is a principal. Principals are people who don't manage anyone, but do most of their work in one of those areas, like a highly specialized, really good at what they do person. And then under leads are seniors. Seniors are people who can manage their own work, make their own estimates, help finish up designs and things, and work with the designers to come up with like numbers and the exact things that have to be done to finish that. And then below that is, sometimes they're called staff, sometimes they don't have any title. And there's other people who've been there a few years and they know their area pretty good and they do their work and they answer to a senior. And then there are juniors, and that's when they're newly hired. They haven't done this much before. They start as junior. Now, that's the hierarchy in programming, art, and design. Now, in programmers, the areas could be graphics or gameplay or AI or UI or networking. Basically, any area that requires some programming expertise. A lot of generalists go into gameplay because gameplay is like writing up combat mechanics rules and writing up stealth rules and working on the dialogue system and stuff, and things that need underlying mechanics that connect to the other systems like the user interfaces or AI. Art has the same hierarchy as programming, but their areas are quite different. That would be, there are people who make 3D models, people who texture those models, people who rig those models, which means they put the bones in them to show how the model could move, and then the people who actually make them move, called animators. There are concept artists who draw images and go, this is what we think the game is going to look like, and this can be anything from a level to scenery to furniture to pieces of artwork. Like we had concept artists do all the ads for the Outer Worlds. There are cinematics artists. There are motion capture artists who specialize in getting mocap suits on people and dogs and all kinds of things and capturing the motion to be used for rigging and animation. Now, if you're a 2D artist, I've said in the past, there's a lot of room for you in games. You don't have to be a 3D artist. Textures are 2D. Icons for use in user interfaces are 2D. Fonts in user interfaces are 2D. Usually the UIs themselves are 2D. So there's a lot of room for 2D artists still. Like I've said before, there are probably more 2D artists working in the industry today than there were in the 90s when it was all 2D artists. And then there are, the same hierarchy exists in design for designers. In there, the areas are things like system mechanics, which are character build, combat mechanics, stealth mechanics, dialogue mechanics, economy. There are narrative designers who create NPCs, write the dialogues for them, come up with the quests for them. Although I'll put a little asterisk next to quests. There are UX designers. UX is the experience, where UI is the actual thing that pops up. The UX designers work with artists and programmers to get the user interfaces working. And then level designers, they make maps with the layout, towns, points of interest, POIs, and they also do quests. They work really closely with the narrative designers to get quests implemented. So, in fact, I still have a memory of leaning out my door and there was a narrative designer and a level designer, and they were talking really quickly in the hallway, and I was just looking at him like, "What you guys talking about?" Because it was just, you could tell it was something interesting going on. And you see that a lot. Narrative designers and level designers get together to work out how quests are going to go. Because the NPCs have to give it to you, but the level designers actually have to place the encounters and put the items in. And so they tend to work very closely. Now there's 2 more areas where there are roles. I am less familiar with these areas because I tend to work with the directors in those areas, and then they distribute the work below them. But it's the audio department. Audio handles everything in the game that you hear. Music, sound effects, and those sound effects could be on items, could be on particle effects, could be on, when you open a container or open a door, or the sound a tree makes, just a scenery item makes because it's being hit by wind. Background noise that you hear. Basically, if you hear it, it's a sound effect. And then user interfaces have their own set of sound effects. And then cinematics usually get music and sound put in them separately because everything's so well sequenced that you don't have to do things independently. You can have everything work together. So that's audio. And then QA has a director for a project. Sometimes it's just a lead. If it's a smaller project, they handle all the testing of the game. Finding the bugs, writing up the bugs, maintaining bug reports. They make test plans so that they usually work with the game director on this. The test plans are for different player builds, different play styles, which can be different than player builds. Like play styles like, I like talking to everybody, I like doing all the side quests, I like killing everyone. Then there's also test plans for console versus PC, and different consoles get different test plans because they have different requirements, like what they require in the menu and save games, and just there's a lot of different requirements for all the different consoles. And production handles that, but they do it through QA. They make test plans for playing the game at different difficulties. They often maintain large save libraries so that when someone comes along and goes, "Hey, I'm supposed to test a character who's a really talky character going through this area," they're like, here's a save game with a character with lots of speech skills about to enter that area. Boom. They also handle minimum and recommended specs, meaning they will play the game on a minimum spec machine and also a recommended spec machine and report back not just bugs they encounter, but like how the frame rate's doing and if things stuttered and if it sounded good and looked good and was still playable and reasonably attractive. So that's all part of QA. I think that's everything in the game development roles. Notice I didn't touch on the administrative part of the company with the presidents and the VPs and HR and marketing. Notice I didn't talk about publishers, localization, all that stuff was usually outside the game development group. I mean, it all goes on the credits of the game, but it's usually outside of what people consider game development roles. So Seth the Guy GD, I hope this answers your question.